Okay, so let us pray. Almighty God and Father, Lord of heaven and earth, I pray in your mercy lead me, where thousands of angels always reflect the exceeding glory of the King of Kings, praising him, where there is happiness, where there is security, where there is always health, where there is purity of mind, where there is no pain, where there are no problems, no anger, no pain of labor, where there is no hunger, where there is no deep water, where no fire burns, where no one perishes, where there is no old age, where youth flourishes, where there is no groaning, where the poor do not weep, where there is eternal peace, where there is joy, where there is no trouble, where there is true life, where there is no bitter death, where it is always divine, where no one knows evil, where love is strong, where the nourishing glory of Christ the King reigns, where there is true joy, where the cup is full of constant life, where the clear name of Christ rules on his throne, where all things are made right, where there is salvation for all, where there is unity, where there is Trinity, where there is real truth, where there is divine virtue, where there is the Lord of Lords, where there is the King of Kings, where there is the choir of heaven, where there is the light from light, where there is the source of life flowing in the heights of the city, where the voice of praise resounds for the Lord, where there is no darkness of night, where the King of Kings rules forever and ever. Amen. All right, so last time I gave you too much color commentary. So I'm going to review, and then we do have to, I think, finish up where we left off. So we're going to do a little bit of what we should have finished last week and then get into today. Today's verses are going to be in chapter 15, verses 1 through 8. That's our pericope. But we're going to start in 14, verse 28. Okay, so 14, verse 28 is probably in the middle of the paragraph. Chapter 14 of John, verse 28. So last time we talked a little bit, I think I called it indwelling, because we talked about how the Spirit is truth. It's a helper, it's a counselor alongside, but somehow also inside the disciples as well, it's with and in. That the indwelling of the Spirit is not like a conditional if, but a definite settled matter, right? How indwelling is invisible, but it is made visible in acts of love. So it's got this internal and external dimension. And then one fulfillment of indwelling is when the daily challenges or every like outside situation is met. So that's the everything, and I will teach you everything, right? And remind you of everything I've said to you, this is how we do it. But we do have to finish like 28 through 31. We're just going to do it briefly. Verse 28, that last half of that verse, mine NRSV says, "You heard me say to you, I'm going away and I am coming to you. If you loved me, you would rejoice that I'm going to the Father, because the Father is greater than I." So I mentioned, I think just in passing, that this verse stressed out the early church fathers. In particular, Athanasius, when he fought the Arians, who were the heretics of the day, they believed that Jesus was absolutely subordinate to God. Okay. Now he kept this verse out of it, but the Orthodox position is basically that the Father is greater because Jesus assumed humanity, but there's not distinctions of greater and lesser in the Godhead. Does that make sense? So it's greater in the sense of how it appears manifest, but not in ultimate reality. So the Athanasian Creed, which is one of the three creeds that we confessional churches, all of us, no matter what name is on the door, teach, they settle on this succinct phrase: equal to the Father according to his divinity, but less than the Father according to his humanity. Okay, that's how they do it. So in other words, Jesus says the Father is greater in like role and power,
but not greater in divinity or in person. I know your brain is like fried, right? Mm-hmm. People died over this. So that's why I'm telling you. And I think I mentioned to you last time that this is one of the things that our brothers and sisters in the Jehovah's Witness Church really point to, because they do believe there is a hierarchy. Okay. So verse 29, Jesus predicted Judas's failure in chapter 13. Peter will deny. Others are going to drop out in chapter 16. The cross is going to devastate this group, right? I've told you these things before it occurs. That when it does occur, you may believe, well, they're a little shaky on that. But then 30 and 31, right? It's we're winding up this section. I'm no longer going to talk with you. The ruler of this world is coming. We have to be brief because evil lurks, right? The cross is not good, even if it shows God's glory, right? There is one that rules this world. However, that one has nothing on me, right? That's what Jesus is saying. And nothing on those who are, I think the way I said it to you last week was locked into me. Nothing on those who are locked into me either. So verse 31, Jesus says the world can learn how much Jesus does love his Father and how much he loves the deceived world, right? Now, world is also sometimes used pejoratively in scripture, and in the Gospel of John in particular, right? The world is bad, corrupt, ruled by Satan, right? That kind of stuff. But in the Gospel of John, there are some exceptions, notable exceptions. So like John 3:16, right? For God so loved the world. And then also here, right? So that the world may know that I love, right? And then chapter 17, the world is used in this like positive sense that way too. So get up, I think mine says, rise. Mine says rise. The very last sentence. What does yours have? Rise. Come now. Let's go. Okay. So it's this really down to earth phrase compared to all this stuff that has come before it, right? This is finally like what he's talking like real language, right? But basically the essence of this teaching is over. So some say what we're going to read today and all that stuff is maybe inserted. Okay, it's possible. I don't know. He's got more. Maybe it's the and another thing, right? That seems very close to the truth for me, right? It's the like Norwegian goodbye.
Or did you see the total crazy look on their faces, like they didn't comprehend, and now he's trying another angle?
That's exactly how it functions. And we've talked about that. Like it's a little circular, right? Yeah. So we've already seen that in chapter 14, how it was hearkening back to 13, which is why we started there. Mm-hmm. And you're going to see the same thing in 15. And 15 will redouble on itself. Mm-hmm. So yes, I think, structure and form is not gospel, right? But it is interesting to look at and wonder about like, why is it this way, right? Because it's here, rise, let us be on our way. Let's go. So our flashback last week was John 8, and we're actually probably going to look at it again, but a different part of John 8. Because what I wanted you to catch last time was this idea of divine self-authority. Basically, they're questioning Jesus. It's the part where he talks about being the light of the world. And verse 19, he said, if they say, where is your Father? Jesus answered, you neither know me nor my Father. If you knew me, you would know my Father also, which is a very convoluted way to say this indwelling that we're talking about is also an indwelling for the Trinity, right? And these are completely new concepts. So of course, nobody understood him. But it's this truth that goes beyond what can be like intellectually described. Okay. So it's not as if Jesus hasn't been talking this way before. That's kind of the purpose of a flashback is I want you to see where else these echoes have come in scripture. Because I don't want you to think this sermon is its own thing all by itself, right? And Jesus has never talked like this before. He has. But this is an interesting place where it all comes together. Okay. Any comments before we move into today? All right. So first part of John 15. We're actually going to read 1 through 8 today because it's its own thought segment. Next time we're going to read 9 through 17. And then I know chapters and verses are important, but actually the thought switches at verse 18. So we're actually going to read 15:18 through 6:4 the following week. Because like I said, I'm kind of taking you thought by thought through. So this is the first part, just the first 8 verses, and the theme does change, and it substantially changes in tone. So the focus becomes like what's going to happen while Jesus is away. And this theme runs all the way through the chapter 16, about halfway through that chapter 2. So this is not a parable, because there is like no narrative story or plot. This is vine and branches stuff is more like, I guess I would say it's an extended metaphor, if that makes sense. And the Old Testament frequently uses the metaphor of Israel as God's vine. So in our flashback, we'll see that. I want to show you a piece where that is talked about. So this is going to be about spiritual vitality, being productive, what that means, not in an economic sense, but in a spiritual sense. There's extravagant promises in here too. And this section starts to hint at some of the opposition that Jesus's followers are going to experience when he goes away. Okay. So almost always this farewell discourse is read during Eastertide in year B. I would say pretty much always. So this section we're going to read today, Vine and Branches, is the section that we read, I think it's like the 5th Sunday after Easter. Okay, so depending on when Easter falls, it's like late April, early May is when we read some of this stuff. So I would love for us to have a volunteer. That's enough of me talking. 15:1 through 8. Is anyone willing? And I know your paragraph probably doesn't end there, but we're gonna stop at 8. Would anybody be willing to read?
I'll read.
Okay, thank you.
I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch of mine that bears no fruit, he takes away, and every branch that does not bear fruit, he prunes, that it may bear more fruit. You are already made clean by the word which I have spoken to you. Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. He who abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. If a man does not abide in me, he is cast forth as a branch and withers, and the branches are gathered, thrown into the fire and burned. You abide in me, and my words abide in you. Ask whatever you will, and it shall be done for you. By this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit, and so prove to be my disciples.
Thank you. I like that. So prudent. I'll write it down. All right, thank you. So a lot is densely packed in here, just like always in the Gospel of John. So we're going to go kind of little chunk by chunk. So the first chunk we're going to consider is verses 1 through 3, which is like the root of the matter, so to speak. Haha. And it gets to that cutting off and cutting back stuff a little bit. So I am are your first words, right? Does anybody have anything different than I am? Good, because I'm glad translators, I mean, this is one of those neon signs in John. He repeats words, and then, it's the book of signs, and then this I am stuff is very important. I am with a predicate statements. So the prior 6, this is the 7th one. The prior 6 are things like what? What are they? I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the sheep gate. I am the good shepherd. I am the resurrection and the life. That's chapter 11. And I am the way, the truth, and the life, which you read in chapter 14. Okay. So I don't know, is this an adjective or a modifier? This is the real or true vine. Do you see that there? Well, maybe you have a different word. True, real, authentic, something like that. Okay. So there is a modifier to that, like there is for living bread or good shepherd, right? This is the true vine. Kind of getting at what we'll see in the Old Testament a little bit later. This idea in some prophecy where the vine is corrupted or it yields bad fruit. This is the true vine. Okay. And my father is the what? What do you got? Vine grower. Anything else? Gardener, which really helps when we get to resurrection morning, thinking he is the gardener.
Peterson says he's the farmer.
The farmer. I like it. Orchardist is another way to translate this. Okay. So this father is like the background presence in the whole chapter. The son is front and center, but the father is this tending presence. Okay. He removes, this is my version, NRSV. He removes every branch in me that bears no fruit. Every branch that bears fruit, he prunes to make it bear more fruit. Or it could be translated cleanses. If you have a footnote, it might say that. What up? What do you got? Anything other than prunes? Everybody's got that? We all know what pruning is. Okay. So what is meant by that? I mean, this is a metaphor. So what are we talking about? And who does it?
The vine grower would be
The father or the orchardist or the gardener or the vine grower. So I found a statistic in my file that 90% of a grapevine should be removed for a healthy plant the next year. Do any of you grow grapes? Is this true? I assume it's true. Even if it's 70, that's pretty severe.
Yeah.
Right? That's radical pruning. Yeah.
Vineyard is labor intensive.
It's labor intensive. Any fruit tree or vine is like, have you grown these apple trees? Who has apple trees?
The apple tree is supposed to be trimmed so the basketball can come
Yep.
down through all the branches.
Oh.
That's what Paul's grandpa said. He said he would trim his apple tree till he could throw his hat through and not hit a branch. That's how much you have to prune.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
No wonder we didn't have
They need light, right? So you can't crowd the fruit. They need air, pests get in when things are too tightly bound. That's true of grapes too, I think. But I think it's way more radical than we non-farmers think. Right? You get it down to the nub.
raspberries you trim way back down.
Raspberries you trim, so same idea, I think, so that the fresh growth is the productive growth. The old growth would bog down the plant's energy, right? Okay, we're getting the idea. So at first it seems hurtful and counterproductive. Yes, pruning. Doesn't sound fun. So if you have ever played the role of the orchardist or the vine grower, is it a little painful to cut all that stuff?
Scary.
A little scary? You think, am I hurting you? Yes. I know I feel that way about like hydrangea and like other like perennials. I'm like, oh, I don't know, it's too much. So the reason I mentioned pruning, or you might have cleansing, or you might have that as a footnote, is because that's what the word is in, is it verse 2? It's katharii, which means like, it's the same word as catharsis in Greek. It means cleansed. So it says you're already cleansed or pruned verse 3. Do you have a footnote? Does it, because mine translates two different words. It says prunes to make it even more fruitful. You are already cleansed. Do you have that?
Yes.
Hey, but it's the same word. And you've been cleansed by the word that I've spoken to you. So this word has a pruning force to it. Okay. So you've already been cut back. It's not just the bad experience. So often when we talk about pruning, we talk about, the bad things that happened that like limited us, that made us better people, right? Which I think is true. I'm not saying that's not true. But this is an interesting difference. This is the word of Jesus and the promise of the cross cleanses and purifies too. So it's not just your bad experiences, but it's the use of the bad experiences along with God's word that does this cleansing and purifying. There's public dimensions to it. There's private dimensions to it, right? By the word I've spoken to you, it's individual. It's also collective. You can see how rich this metaphor it gets to be, right? So abide in me as I abide in you. We're going to get to 4 through 6 next. But before we move on, like, how do disciples bear fruit? We haven't even talked about that part. We've just talked about the cleansing and the pruning. So what is fruit? He never unpacks it. What's your idea? Or maybe you have a footnote that you want to lean on because those are the experts. But I mean, what's in your imagination or heart about bearing fruit?
Bringing the kingdom.
Bringing the kingdom.
I have a footnote in verse 2 that says that in the New Testament, the figure of good fruit represents the product of a godly life or virtues of character.
Okay. And the product of those things. So it is not enough to simply hold the ideal. You act it out. Right? You be it. And I do think this teaching is open-ended on purpose, but I don't want us to skip by and not actually talk about it, right? Because bearing fruit is the expectation. Just like when you prune something, you expect it to grow the next year, right? You've set the conditions. Biologically speaking, the tender's done all they can do to tend. Okay, so the command to abide, I think it's verse 4, is kind of directed at the group, okay? I do think sometimes we read this as only individual. Abide in me as I abide in you, because we kind of forget you as plural. Because in our language, we almost always take it as singular. So I do think that sometimes causes us to have a bias that this is individualistic instead of communal, right? So, but it's clear that there is a, we talk about there's going to be branches, like in verse 5, not branch, right? So we understand the audience now, right? That it's more than one. So let's look at 4, 5, and 6. 4, Jesus is not a passive inviter. Abide in me as I abide in you. Just as the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. So there's some indicatives in this section. There's some imperatives in this section in terms of the parts of speech that are used. Jesus has made his move. And now he awaits our move, right? So my original title for this section was homemaking, because it's about this abiding more even than the vine and branches. The concept that I want you to catch, but vine and branches is just so familiar to us, I decided to go with it. But this abiding that keeps coming up, or maybe, do you have a different word than abide?
I have home.
You have home.
Make
Good.
your home in me.
Good, because that's closer to abide, abode, tent with. It's the Old Testament concept of God dwelling with. Make a dwelling with. So, okay, now we're back to chapter 14. In my Father's house, there are many dwelling places. This is all that same idea. Okay. And to me, abiding in English is like, well, this is one of those words we just use in church. And you don't really use the word abide any other place. Therefore, we really don't have a concept of what it is. And it's not really familiar or earthy to us, which is why I would have tended to call it homemaking, because I think we all understand what that is. Right? So, so this comes up in other places. I think we have time. Yeah, we can skip there now. So the first time it comes up is John. How fast are you at flipping through your Bible? This is all going to be in the Gospel of John, so it's only going to be a few pages. You don't have to find new like books of the Bible. But the concept of abiding or homemaking comes up in John 1. If you go to verses 38 through 42, John 1. This is like when he's calling the disciples, his first disciples. So let's see, 38, Jesus turns to them, what are you looking for? He said to them, come and see. Where is it? Oh, where is it? Is it, where are you staying? Yes, where is it? Let me see, I gotta find it. 39, yes, he said, come and see. They came and saw where he was staying. Now you got it, yep. Where are you making your home, Rabbi? And he says, come and see.
And there's a footnote.
So what does it say?
Jesus invites his first disciples to know him through abiding with him.
There it is. All right. So let's look at the next one. John 6. It's a really long chapter. It's the bread of life chapter. John 6, and you got to find verse 56. Okay, and there's like 60 some verses. So, no, 71. So 56.
Who eats my flesh and drinks my blood abides in me.
There it is. So the person eating and drinking is making their home with me too. Okay. And then we move to John 8. And we're going to look for verses 31 and 32. And this will depend on how you translate. Because mine, this would not be an obvious connection. John 8:31. If you continue in my word is what mine says.
Mine says, if you make my word your home,
There it is.
you will indeed be my disciple.
Because it's the same word. So if you continue sounds like I will make an intellectual agreement with you, Jesus, that I will do my daily devotions. That's not this. This is if you continue making my home your home in my word, you will be free. Interesting stuff, isn't it? Okay, so now you're getting it. Now you're getting it with this abide stuff. At least we know what abide means. So like I said, vine and branches is what I titled it, but really this concept is the abiding piece. So readers will not hope to be, what was that?
I have a question.
Go ahead, go
I
ahead.
don't mean to, but is there a tense difference between like verse 2 and 3? Because in one verse, he's saying you be pruned,
Mhm.
and then everybody takes that to the hard experiences in your life. The third verse, he says you already are clean.
Right,
So that means, I mean, there's a million doctrines on this, that some say when you believe in Jesus, you're done.
Yep,
You don't
yep.
have to do any.
there's sanctification, right? Yep.
Right, and some really hone in on this. Yeah.
I'm gonna
So,
I'm gonna look, let's see, verse 2. Hang on. Talk amongst yourselves, tell a joke, get another piece of cup of coffee.
It says he removes, so present.
But when is,
And then
when are
three,
you
you
coming?
have
That's what I want to know.
Yeah.
After you've read 2, then it happens.
It's a work in
Yeah,
progress.
verse 3 definitely has the past tense, that you are. So it is this idea of, now, how we apply that meaning, is it ongoing? Or like, I think the Lutheran perspective would be every time you remember it, right? Every time you live it out, you don't have to earn the promise again. The promise stands. But yeah, it's definitely, this is certainly by verse 3, it's like, again, he's speaking to these disciples. He is saying, like, you don't have to worry about earning that anymore. I have spoken the word, you are cleansed.
And then
Already.
with this in chapter 8, it talks about if the word abides in you, is that, I think people stumble at this because of you think, well, then it must be degrees, because bad things are still happening.
Yes.
And those kinds of things. I stumble over this.
Yes.
So-
And that question that you're raising is exactly what Jesus wrestles with. And I'm not sure he closes, I'm not sure it is closed. I think it's open-ended, because he talks about making your home with me. And then he talks about suffering. And then he talks about making your home with me. And then he talks about suffering. So, if I'm just taking my cues from Jesus, Jesus doesn't remove suffering. He gives purpose, forbearance to live with that. But it is not as if the disciples aren't persecuted or that people don't suffer bad things happening to them. And Jesus himself, right, has those things happen. So, that is a good question. I think it depends on how much. So the answer to your question about verb tense is, it is a done deal in the Greek. Verse 3. How we apply that, though, among our faith traditions, probably different. Dick, you're thinking hard, I can tell. Say something.
Well, I'm just thinking that coming here is a proving of some of the thoughts that I have, and over the years that, it continues. We did this a long time ago with Charlie Robinson. Some of you may remember Charlie, part of the thing, and he and I talked afterwards, and I remember Charlie kind of disappointed me because he said the pruning goes on. And I thought it was done. I thought it should be done. He always said the pruning goes on.
Yep.
I'm finding that he was very true. It was as life goes on. Some of the things that I thought at one time, I'm in a different place now in my life. Realize that it has been, whatever it was pruned away, and to come here is risky in that sense for us. We may have this idea that we've held on to for so long, and it gets challenged and eventually cut away. Which hopefully opens up our hearts to see a little deeper in the word and so yeah.
We haven't talked about this, but I think it's important when we get to so the overarching piece, I guess, that I'm gathering from this, no matter how we see the pieces of our life, pruning, fruitfulness, whatever, the idea, and this is true, the assumption is that growing will occur. So to live the Christian life, to enact your love into the world, whatever it is, that there is some dynamic piece to this. If there's going to be spiritual vitality, there actually has to be growth. And that we may not want to grow. So I finally pulled this, I might talk about this on Sunday, I'm not sure, but I have a little plant that I transplanted into my office. And it's this rainbow colored, it looks like a philodendron, but it's rainbow colored. And those grow like anything. So I'm like, this will be cute, stick it in there. And I could not get this dang thing to, and I thought, Why is it the water? Because what I have it in is a plant that I got from my mom's funeral. So it's like, it's dirt in a plastic lined thing. And I'm like, maybe it just doesn't have enough air. Maybe maybe it doesn't like having such wet feet. Although, like I said, can't really kill a philodendron. And it's not dead. It's just never flourished. It's never flourished. So finally yesterday, I'm like, I'm just gonna look at this thing. So I pulled it out because it's still just like this big and I've had it like a year. So weird. It's not dead, but it has not grown. I pull it out, I see its roots are completely curved to the side. It cannot grow deep enough. You know what I mean? It's not root bound. I can't say that, but it must want a habit where its roots go straight. And all it is like curled, like gnarly little feet. And I'm like, that's why you're not growing. You don't have enough room to grow, right? Like at all. I thought this was adequate space for you, but you don't want to be, your habit is not going to be horizontal. Or you want to be vertical. Okay. So like, you learn that stuff as you go, right? About like conditions and limits. And maybe there's artificial limits, right? Of containers and so forth. So, so readers will not hope to be, but they are branches. If you look at verse 5. So get that out of your mind. If you're not sure, sorry, you're stuck. Nothing you can do about it, right? You are branches. The divine gardener is already at work to make you more productive. You cannot live well apart from the vine, but you also cannot remove yourself from the vine. Okay. I think we get this real mixy-uppy because we now consume our religious beliefs.
What do you?
Churches. If we don't like what a church is doing, we leave the church. And then we get it real conflated with God. Do we not? See what I mean? This is challenging to me too, but I think it's true. So, this goes beyond our affiliations. This you are branches stuff. At least to me, it does. Fruitfulness is promised. Now it switches to the individual, verse 5. The individual who abides in me. Let me see, where am I? The individual makes his or her home with me is fruitful, but the fruitfulness is not quantity. It's quality, right? These are substantive things, not mathematical things. Fruitfulness is not numeric. I read a cool thing about verse 6 from St. Augustine. And it is, the usefulness will be aut vitis, aut ignis, either for the vine or for the fire. Okay, because we get to judgment here, right? Most of this is just pure gospel. But when we get to like 6, 7, well, 6 especially, there's, there's the pruning, there's the fire, there's the, there will be things about our lives that are not useful. Okay. Then we get to these really big promises in 7 and 8. And there's mutuality here between Jesus and the disciples. And it's like a gift, and it's like a task. So you really start to see the conversational promise that's happening here. I think Vern's, that New American Standard said, so prove that you are my disciples. Because the one who remains in the true vine, right? Which again, not much you can do about it, but the one who is fruitful, is given the promise of effective prayer. So, and this is because we stumble over this verse, and we were like, name it and claim it.
Yeah.
Right? Stuff. Okay. So I want you to remember that homemaking metaphor, abiding. And I want you to think about the times that you were a house guest at somebody's house. And you realized you didn't have some of the things you needed. So you're like, do you have any, okay, this bed isn't made. Do you have a pillowcase? Oh, I forgot dental floss. Do you have dental floss? Right? Like all those things that you would ask, like when you're a guest in somebody's home. You guys have had this experience, right? Or are you all expert packers and never forget anything? Or in the midst of traveling, something breaks. Now I need thread. I busted my button on my coat, whatever. Okay. And so, you end up being kind of a little dependent on that person hosting you. Oh, I can't find the orange juice, so I can't, right, all that stuff. So I want you to think about that. This invitation in verse 7 is like this hospitable hospitality invitation. Like, just ask for it and it's yours, right? Your host is not going to say no to you for some of these things, right? They're going to give it to you. But perhaps we need to be sensible in the whatevers that we ask for. Right? You're not going to ask your host for their money market account number. Right?
How about the password?
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of praying when it comes to passwords. So maybe, but it's this way that Jesus makes his home with his disciples is the home is when the words are taken seriously. And by serious, I mean seriously in the sense that, not frivolously. And they're listened to and responded to. So one author I read says, may we not disrespect Jesus by our thoughtlessness, name it and claim it, nor by our not asking and unbelieving. God doesn't answer like he did in the early church days, right? So verse 8, we get to hallowing or glorifying. The first petition in the Lord's Prayer is, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. In John, we're told that one of the ways that we glorify God is to bear much fruit. Okay. And just like there are many kinds of fruit, right? Apples, pears, lemons, oranges, figs, right? Whatever. And there's many varieties within each kind. Even if we just want to use this vine and branches stuff, we could think about all the different varieties of grapes that become all different varieties and blends of wine, right? I mean, you go in the store and it's exponential, right? Much fruit, we might, and I would say we will have different fruit. We might be different types, right? If we want to extend this metaphor. So let's see, the last thing, because I do want to get to our flashback in Isaiah. The last thing I want to read this to you, and I'll read it to you next week. Both the condition for and the consequence of fruitfulness is discipleship. To Jesus, the Father is glorified when you become disciple to me. And another author, I found this interesting, puts it this way. We go forward by going backward. We move ahead by starting over again. We become disciples of Jesus so that we may ever again become disciples of Jesus. It is continuing conversion. Thoughts?
Kind of like Lenten renewal.
It's the whole thing, you may ask what you will and you shall get it. Are we all thinking, humans naturally think, oh, good, now I can ask for, world peace and I'll get it. But maybe it's the wrong concept of, maybe Jesus intended that we ask for the pruning rather than ask for a particular thing, because a particular thing is going to get you in real trouble.
And I think there is a dimension to this that we can and do wrestle with and explore our entire lives through, right? Because we all have a personal perspective. There are things we really, really want.
Yeah.
And not all of them are selfish, right?
Right.
What you're talking about is not selfish. I mean, I literally go to bed every night and think, I pray Zelensky survives the night. I don't get to probably ask that, but yet I do, right?
I've heard people say, where is God for the Ukraine people?
Even with well-intentioned prayers, God still answers with a yes, or maybe later, or I've got a better idea.
It's a conversation, right? So if I can, I probably, Jesus farewell sermon is probably slightly a misnomer, because I think it doesn't quite get at the idea of this conversation that is continual. So that means we are influenced by and changed as life goes through. I mean, I'm gonna say, I think God is too. Right? There's a dynamism to that. Not that God is an almighty, all powerful, blah, blah, blah. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is, we live in a dynamic world where conditions are ever changing. And I have to believe that with prayer too. Right? I don't always know. But also I think there's a measure of, there are some things are better than I would have ever expected. Or could have conceived of. Right? I didn't even pray for, maybe nobody prayed for it. It still turns out better than we thought. It's not transactional in the crudest sense of the term. It is conversational, relational, so that both parties are changed. I think.
This might be a little off track, but I was thinking, social media, Facebook, there's a lot of, but someone had posted a while back, and it was a quote from Mother Teresa about how she used to pray for specific things like peace. And, then I think it said she started to pray for wisdom and understanding and, what can I do
Right.
to help?
And prayer changes us, no doubt about it. Or it should.
I think I read something about Mother Teresa also, that she had to not try to solve all the problems. She try to solve the one that is currently in front of her. Otherwise, she said it was impossible to face all of this.
100%. I'm sure that's true. The amount of suffering in the world is vast. Right? All right, let's do our flashback real quick, and then I got a scoop. Isaiah 5. We're not going to be in John. We're going to be in Isaiah. I want you to see another time when this vine and branches metaphor is used. So Isaiah 5, it's like verses 1 through 7. Isaiah 5, verses 1 through 7. Does anybody want to read?
I will.
Okay, thank you.
Let me sing for my beloved, my love song concerning his vineyard. My beloved had a vineyard on a very fertile hill. He dug it and cleared it of stones and planted it with choice vines. He built a watchtower in the midst of it and hewed out a vine vat in it. He expected it to yield grapes, but it yielded wild grapes. And now inhabitants of Jerusalem and people of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. What more was there to do for my vineyard that I have not done in it? When I expected it to yield grapes, why did it yield wild grapes? And now I will tell you what I will do to my vineyard. I will remove its hedge, and it shall be devoured. I will break down its wall, and it shall be trampled down. Through 5?
Through 7.
I will make it a waste. It shall not be pruned or hoed, and it shall be overgrown with briars and thorns. I will also command the clouds that they rain no rain upon it. For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the people of Judah are his pleasant planting. He expected justice, but saw bloodshed, righteousness, but heard a cry.
So this is not such a positive metaphor, which is why I wanted you to see it. Could God, the grower, have done, or God / the grower, have done any more?
I have a footnote that says that he's talking about, that Jesus is, they say, are clothing himself in the same imagery.
Mhm.
And he's stressing that Israel finds its life and vigor no longer in the old covenant, but in the new covenant, ratified by its Messiah.
So the idea of Israel as the vine is all throughout Old Testament. So it's here in Isaiah 5. Jeremiah talks about, I planted you as a choice vine. Ezekiel, Hosea, they all use this imagery, okay? Psalm 80 does too. You brought us from Egypt like a grapevine. You drove away the nations and transplanted us into your land. So the vine does become a symbol of the nation of Israel. Okay, like kind of like the United States has the bald eagle. Okay, and so they even put a vine on their coins in the first century. All right. So I mean, this is when Jesus is talking about the true vine. It's kind of like what Vern said. I want you to catch. There's that layer too. So it's not just the homemaking and the abiding stuff. It's also that taking this metaphor that they already knew as familiar and turning it. Right? And the orientation is Jesus, which is not what it would have been for their time. Does that make sense? Okay, I think we're gonna have to wrap up. Next time, we're gonna look at John 15, 9 through 17. And it's kind of the exposition of the vine and the branches, and we're gonna talk about commandment keeping. All right, that'll be our section next time. Thank you for coming. Yeah.